Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our beloved producer and good friend, Richard Wicca. Thank you, Richard. And also many thanks to our friends at WBNY, Buffalo's original alternative radio station, 91.3 FM out of Buffalo State College, Buff State. Thank you, Buff State. And giving thanks reminds me that we are on stolen indigenous land, stolen Seneca, Haudenosaunee, Seneca land, most of us on Seneca land. Although not Joseph, but anyway, we as we remember our indigenous friends, and I also am reminded to give thanks to everyone who's gathered here, to Mother Earth for all of the creation, for the water that is life, for the plants, the medicinal plants, the plants that feed us, and for the animals, the four-leggeds, the winged creatures, swimming creatures, and all the different elements that we have on this beautiful creation. And I hope that they all and we all will act as originally instructed so that life can continue on this creation. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for coming for this special show on the Ukraine. Very important, very vital, and people just very focused on that topic, and we're very thrilled to have two wonderful people with us to discuss it, both experts in their own way. One, Joseph Gerson. So thank you, Joseph, for coming. Joseph is as the president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security. You're also the vice president of the International Peace Bureau, and I know you've been in talks about Ukraine and trying to consult with different government people about what we need to do to de-escalate instead of escalating. So you're an author and so active and so vital in this effort. So thank you, Joseph, for coming.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. Amidst it all.
Well, it's great to have you, and it's so great to have Yuri here. Yuri Hreshchyshyn.
Very good.
Yes, thank you. I've been working on it. I will say, "Дякую."
Proшу.
Oh, so yes. So I'm thanking you. I am very thankful. So as a Ukrainian-American, your voice is so important as somebody who has people over there, is hearing what's going on over there. And it's as we feel it so vital, I know you must feel it so very, very, very much so very much more.
Well, it's difficult. It's been difficult for the last 8 years, really, since the initial invasion in the Donbas region of Ukraine and Crimea. And the fighting started then. And over the course of the last 8 years, about 14,000 people have been killed needlessly. And now this escalation happened a couple of weeks ago, where we're approaching that number dead between Ukraine and Russia within 2 weeks.
Oh. So I think one of the things that will keep us, focused or at least I don't want to say sane, but help us in this very difficult, trying, and scary topic, very devastating issue, is to bring out some of our values that we want to bear in mind in the conversation and in the issue itself. So I'm going to invite us to just go around in as the Haudenosaunee go, counterclockwise. So I'll start with you, Joseph, just as I did before, and then to you, Yuri, and we'll just share some values that we want to uphold in this. So, Joseph?
Well, I think we want to uphold the value of life and of freedom. For me, the value is the realities I was forged out of are the Holocaust in Europe and the commitment of never again to anyone, and never to participate in the crimes of silence, and a recognition that there's a very direct relationship between truth and who lives and who dies and how. And also kind of forged in significant measure by the civil rights movement and the opposition to the Vietnam War. So those are all elements that have framed me, and I've been pretty deeply involved in the No to War, No to NATO network based in Europe, going back to 2008 and NATO's role in the Afghanistan war.
Thank you. Those are some wonderful values to uphold, and truth and freedom and life, of course, life to life. So vital. So, and Yuri, what would you?
Well, you know, I grew up the son of immigrants. I was born here, but both my parents emigrated from Ukraine. Different stories. They met in New York City and then moved here. But they escaped what was then a totalitarian regime in formation, and indeed the war itself. Germany was invading from the west. The Russian forces from the east. Ukraine was somewhat in the middle.
Right.
There was a partisan movement, and there were those that simply had to that time lived in peace and wanted to continue, but were forced out. So among them, my father ended up in Germany, finishing school, then New York City, then moving to Buffalo, finding work here. My mother was the daughter, one of two daughters of a Ukrainian Catholic priest, who had to leave his village. It was about to be assaulted. Thankfully, a German officer got them over the front and into eventually a displaced persons camp. It's strange how the enemy can sympathize on a personal level, but that's what happened there. Here, you know, in the last couple of weeks, and really over a period of time escalating to this, we've been very worried and hurt. This has taken resources from, you know, we'd rather be exchanging culturally, educationally, instead of raising money for medical supplies to treat wounded individuals in Ukraine.
Right, right. So that caring for people, that remembering our ancestors and how we came to be who we are and how we came to be where we are, too. Those are things so critical to the conversation. So I want to thank you for sharing that. And I want to hold up the value that actually was in both of your values, the values of truth and love. So that truth that is, you know, the different aspects of what's going on. So we have to look at the actual facts of there are actual facts about what's going on, and then love, you know, how we need to love each other, how we're all connected, how we all suffer when other people are doing, you know, when people are being hurt. We do all suffer, and we'll suffer immediately or we'll suffer over the long term. So that love, that is the love that makes people fight for each other, fight for peace, for justice, you know, that is love. So I think that's what brings us here, and I'm very grateful that you're willing to talk about this very critical and very important topic. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on and how we got here to where we were. And actually, we've sort of, as I say, we've been sort of circling around that too. You know, so you've mentioned some things, Yuri. Maybe, if Joseph, you want to say a little something about what you think, you know, how you think we've gotten, where you think we are and how you think we've gotten here.
Well, we're currently in a disastrous situation, right? I mean,
Yes.
the war is intensified. People, innocent civilians, are being killed. I think estimate of as many as 4 million people have fled the country, and we face the danger of a very, very long war. I mean, how we got here. One of my favorite quotations is from William Faulkner, who wrote that the past isn't dead; it isn't even past. And so, in some ways, what we're dealing with here is the, if you will, the trauma of the breakup of the Russian and Soviet Empire back in 1989, 91. And, much as if here in the United States, we lost our empire almost overnight. And so the Russians have this view of being a great power, going back to the Tsars, going back to Catherine the Great. And so, with Putin, you have a commitment to try to reestablish as much of that empire as possible. You also have the other elements of history here, where, from the Russian perspective, they have suffered 3 massive invasions from the West: Napoleon, the Kaiser, and Hitler. It costed tens of millions of Russian lives. So, not unlike the United States, with its desire to, with the Monroe Doctrine, to maintain its sphere of influence here, and the United States, the sphere of influence goes across the Pacific, and really has been much of Europe since 1945. They wanted to have a buffer, and Ukraine, given its geographical location, has been seen by the Russians as a buffer. You also have the Russian, the complicated elements of Russian history here, where the origin of the Russian state is back to Kievan Rus in the 10th century. So you've got lots of history, lots of myths at play here. But I think the reality is that the war could have been avoided. I mean, it didn't have to happen. There were possibilities for compromise, and on the one hand, the West could have done better, but ultimately, I think we have to blame Putin. There was no need for him to launch that invasion, and what he's doing is impacting. Not only is it devastating Ukrainians, and I think looking to some form of a carve up of Ukraine, and it's a country that's been carved up many times over the centuries. But it's also negatively impacting Russians, and they were warned of that. On the one hand, the sanctions. On the one hand, I'm just as happy to have the oligarchs having their yachts seized.
Right.
But on the other hand, the broad sanctions are devastating the innocent, many innocent Russian people as well. I was on a webinar on Monday. With people in Africa, and with the combination of the blockade of Odessa, through which Ukrainian wheat has long been exported, and the sanctions on Russian grain, we're facing across Africa. We're going to have increased food insecurity, increased famine, and around the world with the sanctions on oil, as we can see at our gas pumps. The price of fuel oil is going up, and that's going to hit the global economy. I think one of the bigger things that is not really being discussed right now, in terms of where we are, is devastating our ability to address climate change. What we need more than anything else is cooperation among the world's nations in order to cooperate both in terms of policies and investment to hold back the climate emergency, climate chaos. And this is going by the boards, including increased reliance on fossil fuels. So in addition to the people who are being, that we can see being murdered right now, this is also taking a toll on coming generations. So this war is an absolute disaster. Not to mention, as I guess we'll talk about later,
right.
What this means in terms of possible escalations and nuclear weapons and so on.
Let me take it backwards for possible escalations. Just within the last couple hours, there's breaking news that missiles have been launched and struck in Belarus. So clearly Putin is trying to escalate again, trying to bring yet another independent state, or somewhat independent. Lukashenko has pretty much turned Belarus over to Russia. Regardless, there's this recent escalation. In addition, 3 Panamanian registered traders have been hit in the Black Sea. This is just today.
Just happened, yeah.
So there's this. This may get out of control. Going back to the sphere of influence question, you know, after '91, when Ukraine became independent, as did many other Soviet states, there continued to be a relatively peaceful coexistence. Many Ukrainians have relatives in Russia and vice versa.
Right.
There was cultural exchange. There was certainly economic interdependence, and to the degree that Ukraine was allowed to evolve into a successful democratic state with slowly rising standard of living, things were okay.
Right.
However, at the point at which, again, and Putin, in the course of the last 30 years, I think we've gone through, well, forgive me if I've lost count here, 5 or 6 presidents in Ukraine.
Right.
While Putin has been continuously the only ruler, although he shifted from presidency to secretary in the back or something. Irrelevant.
Right. Didn't make
after Yeltsin gave up his attempt to rule the country, Putin took over, and nothing's changed since. The moment Russia decided. Now, there was plenty of influence to try to keep Ukraine in the sphere. But the moment Russia decided to physically cross the border and assault Ukrainians, take over the territory, things really changed for the worse for both countries. This is not in any way useful to the Russian people. This is going to cost economically, and it's costing the blood of young Russian troops that have been sent over, told that they were going on a peacekeeping mission, many of them conscripts. And indeed, it looks like more Russians are dying in this conflict now than Ukrainians.
Right.
And there will be that long-term consequences. Indeed, Ukraine supplies something like a quarter of the Middle East wheat supply, and Africa as well. So if those supplies are interrupted from Ukraine and from Russia, this is going to be a problem. Obviously, U.S. and Canada can step up a little bit, but regardless, the cost will go up. Somebody's going to have to pay that difference, where those living only at a subsistence level can afford what they can afford. This is not in the interest of anybody going forward.
Right.
But on the other hand, when you question whether there was a need to respond militarily, I don't think Ukraine had a choice in this situation. At some point, you have to step up and put a stop to the continuous onslaught. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that Russian soldiers are dying. It's unfortunate that this is going to have a long-term impact on all of us worldwide. But it was started by a maniac in Moscow.
Right.
Now, granted, perhaps under some pressure, but he certainly is not leading to the benefit of anybody, including his own government.
No, and I don't think anyone, I think that if there's a very clear bad guy in this is, him. But one other thing I'd mention is just, internet. Well, go ahead, Joseph. You were about to say.
So what I wanted to kind of look at is some of the complexities here, because I think we like to look at things in black and whites, and there is complexity here.
Of course.
So we have, I think as you mentioned before, we have the expansion of NATO to Russia's borders. That didn't need to happen.
Right.
And that certainly has fueled the situation here. And we had a situation in which, in the early years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had a series of principally European, but also U.S. and Russian conferences looking to create essentially a European home, European house, right, which was to include Russia. Colin Powell's former chief of staff has described how in the first days there was giddiness in the White House in terms of looking at the ability to cooperate with Russia, that changed with my classmate Bill Clinton. When he began the expansion of NATO, not right, necessary. No. Those countries could have gotten their security independent of joining NATO. And we had another major misstep by the West in 2013 and 2014, when in Ukraine, then looking to join the European Union, which one would have hoped it could have done. The European Union said all or nothing, that Ukraine had to also break its economic ties with Russia in order to join the European Union. And you did have in eastern Ukraine, Russian-oriented people and an economy. It was that tension which triggered, the Maidan protests and then Russia's invasion and conquest of much of the Donbass region. So we have that. The other thing I want to kind of point to in terms of some of where we are and some of the problems we face. On the one hand, Putin has got himself Russia, and of course Ukraine in an absolutely terrible position, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he might end up leveling Ukraine like he did Grozny and in Syria. But then comes the process of occupying and trying to rule. He's facing the likelihood of years of insurrectionary resistance, which will bleed Russia. I was talking to someone today who just was in Washington now, talking about the number of people in Washington who actually hope the war goes on as with Afghanistan, to basically bleed Russia dry. So that's something that's really not in anybody. In ourselves. But the other piece that's here, and I think we have to look at it in terms of our society, is you have this war fever, which is really kind of taken over the society right now. We have in the United States and in NATO nations massive increases in military spending. We just had a big increase in the budget that was just passed last week. And already the calls for the next year's budget are even higher. This is when the United States military budget was already 10 times the size rather the size of the 10 next biggest military spenders.
Right.
Fine. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be seeing here the other piece that's here, and I'll shut up for a minute. It's just what's happened with Putin's invasion of the Ukraine is a smashing of what was the post-Cold War order. It's over. Obviously there have to be concerns now about what's going to happen in the Baltic states, what's going to happen in Moldova. So you have the buildup of NATO's military. In Germany is this year with tripling its military spending. And what you're going to have is increased contest for global dominance. I mean, we need to understand the United States is an empire. It's going to try to maximize its power in this situation. And of course, the fears are that Russia will become essentially a client state of China, and will face an alliance of Russia and China, and that in turn looks to be more military spending, more confrontations, and more danger of miscalculations and accidents, leading to great power war and possibly even nuclear war. So it's a very, very dangerous moment.
Let me add to this. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make a mention of the fact that the United States, promised not to bring any more any arms or armaments or allies really up to their border and to the Russian border. And of course we broke our promises. And of course we also have had our own wars of conquest, empire and conquest in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere that put us in a very bad position. And the other thing I wanted to mention that we might factor in too, the people of Russia, there have been 4,000 arrests of people who are protesting the war. So one of the things that we've thought about, first of all, the importance, and the importance to stop the killing is absolutely critical. So that's and so what we need to do is find a way to stop the killing.
Yeah.
And the diplomacy, and to, it's that it should be about not how to win the war, but how to stop the war, and how to give, allow Putin a way to save face, or some other events and avenues, etc. Go ahead.
Yeah, well,
Yuri.
I'll go with the saving face portion. There's a way for Russia to save face. There is no way for Putin to save face at all, given how far he's gone. He needs to go, whether it's Russians themselves. Well, it can only be Russians themselves that change the orientation. I take issue with the idea, of course it can happen this way, but it does not need to. Russia does not need to become a client state of China. Although, indeed, the rise of China is critically the largest issue that we're facing in the United States, given their economic strength and the fact that we've given away so much from the United States to China. We're dependent.
Right.
And we're interdependent to some degree. Well, you mentioned our friend Bill Clinton. Well, if you recall, subsequent to that, we had Hillary Clinton and the famous reset. That, while laudable and perhaps a good last attempt to try to patch things up and bring Russia into the fold with the West, failed not because of the United States. I'm convinced it failed because of Russia's policies. NATO expansion, while true, if NATO had not expanded, would Russia have respected that and continued to live at peace? I personally doubt it. I think Putin's intent always has been to become the next Catherine the Great and restore that great empire under one rule, under Moscow. I think going forward, capitulation should be not by Ukraine, but by Russia at this point. And at that stage, perhaps Russia will join with the United States, with the rest of Europe, and be part of that Western Eastern alliance in Europe that continues to work together, regardless of China. This would be my hope, that we can still work things out with the Russian nation, the Russian government, and the Russian people, Putin aside.
Can I just mention one hope that I have, which is about the United Nations being an actual, functional organization that could do more. So changing and having we need a world where people are, as you were saying, Joseph, where people are going to cooperate on the issues at hand. And so we all when we do Women in Black, there's a poster, all wars are lost. We know that. Everyone knows it. No one thinks, and I want to say as, the woman here, that there is another way is possible. It doesn't have to be like this. And part of it is if we don't keep preparing for war and having all these armaments, and if we do have international organizations that are actually able to function and not something like the Security Council where all there is an ability for everyone to stop everyone so that nothing really gets done.
So look, I come out of the peace movement, but I also, think in terms of realist politics, right?
Sure.
So we can hope that maybe one set of oligarchs or the military might want to do a coup to get rid of Putin. There's a remote, I would say, a very remote chance that would happen. But the reality is that Putin also reflects a culture. So I don't think we should expect whoever succeeds Putin will necessarily be any better. And the idea of, and so the idea of face saving and capitulation, look, the reality is that Russia is going to come out of this war greatly weakened. It's isolated. Its economy has been devastated, and it's going to be fundamentally weakened. And its isolation is going to continue for a very long time. Which means that the one place that it can turn is to China. The degree to which China will want to embrace them is another matter, and we're seeing them sort of playing an uncertain game in the United Nations, where it abstained, and elsewhere. There's the question about Russians asked China for weapons. We don't know if they're going to be providing them or not. The degree of economic support. China also doesn't want to fall too far afoul of either sanctions or losing access to the European market. So it's an open question quite how far the Chinese are going to go. But I think we do need to think in terms of how the war is not going to end with an easy capitulation on either side. I mean, we're looking at something very long, a lot of death. I was thinking earlier today, Benjamin Rush, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, when they got around to naming the ministries, he thought that the War Department here should be named the Department for the Creation of Widows and Orphans. Deep in our history,
right?
But I think we do need to recognize that there have been some negotiations going on, and as the war approaches something like a stalemate. We may need to be thinking in terms of what Tom Friedman called a dirty compromise, and we can see Zelensky even talking in some of these terms.
Sure.
So I mean, one of the failures in the run-up to this war was Biden refusing to say that the open door to NATO membership was going to stay open. That didn't help matters.
Right. No, that
and although he was bound by the Constitution, Zelensky was holding to that aim. Well, now we hear that Zelensky is saying if we can get some other security guarantees,
right,
maybe that isn't necessary.
Sure.
So in those negotiations, that's one possible way. I have a little problem with my computer here. Give me half a second. I can't see you. Hold 1 second.
Oh, okay. No, you need to see us, but you're quite right on that, and that would be wonderful.
So the other piece that we're hearing about in these discussions is what Ukrainian neutrality might look like. How sincere the Russians are in this, we don't know, but it's got to be pursued. We're hearing that there might be some interest on Zelensky's part to accept becoming a neutral society. The bottom line is, of course, there has to be a ceasefire, right? I mean, ceasefire is absolutely central.
Absolutely.
And secondly, as the Ukrainians are demanding, the Russian troops have got to go. Not only the Russian troops, the other foreign troops are going to have to go
yes, please.
As well. So I think we need to be clear on that. And the other piece that I think we're looking at is, what will be the future of Donetsk region and of Crimea. Some in Ukraine might be quite willing to see Donetsk go. I mean, it is Russian oriented. Russian culture, Russian Orthodox religion, economic ties more to Russia. And in the West, it's been much more oriented toward Poland. I mean, it was once part of the Lithuanian Empire.
Right.
So one could, and the lines, the boundaries of Ukraine have changed back and forth over centuries. So that might be one possible way to go. And the question of Crimea, the reality is that the Russians are not going to give that up anytime soon. And so just as, for example, in Asia, between Japan and China over the Senkaku Dayu Islands, there was an agreement back when they established relations that they would keep that issue on the shelf. They would agree to disagree.
Right.
And that may be a way out. I mean, we shouldn't be looking for all or nothing solutions in this. And what we have to have is something which is going to be respected. And the other element we have to look at here is what is the European order going to look like on the other side of this? In the run-up to the war, it's interesting. Michael McFaul, who's the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, guy who absolutely hates Putin, was saying, given the power relations, given what we were facing here, maybe it's time to have a Helsinki 2.0 set of negotiations. Maybe it's time to negotiate a new grand bargain. This would be a new grand bargain with a greatly weakened Russia. So, there's a lot here at play, and we need to be thinking down the line and thinking as well in terms of what this means in terms of both nuclear weapons and what this means in terms of climate.
So neutrality is indeed a possibility only because that was the state of affairs before the war broke out.
Right.
Fact of the matter is, while the door was open to NATO, Ukraine had not taken that step, even though it had expressed that intention, and that intention is enshrined in the Constitution. And that was done under Poroshenko. Keep in mind that was done only after Russia invaded Donbass. So had Putin not taken those steps, first of all, there was a lease agreement in Crimea that they would continue to use the naval base in Sevastopol for like 50 years, essentially indefinitely. And there was a peaceful state of affairs. The 1994 Budapest Memorandum, to which Russia was a signatory, was violated by Russia.
Absolutely.
They violated territorial integrity. That was the one issue that was guaranteed. If Ukraine would give up its nukes, then Russia would be Ukraine would be guaranteed territorial integrity, and that means the borders as they were established essentially post World War II, as Ukraine was a republic of the Soviet Union, but then from independence on, the borders were what they were, including Crimea, with the deal that Russia would be able to operate out of there. All of that went out the window when Russia invaded. And I would suggest that Ukraine will not be willing to give, just as famously Biden says, we're not going to give up an inch of NATO territory. Ukraine's not going to give up an inch of Donbass. They're going to want it back. It's a wealthy area, a lot of mineral resources, and heavy industry that did indeed trade with Russia, but also supplied some of the West. The Western European nations have their own strong economic ties with Russia. Germany certainly very dependent on Russian gas and other relatively raw resources. Things were not all that bad. Somebody pulled the trigger, and here we are.
Right. I want to make one mention because we started to talk about it, and you did allude to it and mention about nuclear weapons. So, of course, the fact that the U.S. and Russia have 90% of the nuclear weapons that exist is one of the things. But I just want to make the special mention of the nuclear power plants which also are potential nuclear weapons just as they stand. So that the existential threat is not just to the people who are being killed, Ukrainians and Russians, but then really to the rest of the world. This has to be de-escalated.
Yeah,
please.
I mean, one of the people that I work with who is now under some pressure from the FSB, you know, the successor to the KGB in Russia, in the run-up to the war, you know, he was warning about the dangers to the nuclear power plants.
Right.
So that's a danger there, and it's a danger really in any country where you have nuclear power plants, right? And nuclear power plants are a danger in and of themselves.
Yes,
in terms
yes,
of
they are.
and the waste, the waste that we'll have for hundreds of thousands of years.
Right.
The other piece, just to follow on, in terms of the Budapest Agreement, I absolutely agree with that. And one of the dangers now here is that a number of other nations are looking to say, well, okay, well, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, then it was invaded. What does that mean for us? Should we be getting nuclear weapons? I mean, what does this mean for North Korea? What does it mean for Iran? And you have the former prime minister in Japan, Abe, saying it's time to welcome U.S. nuclear weapons back to Japan. So we have this other unintended consequences, and of course the other piece that's there, and one can absolutely appreciate why President Zelensky would be calling for a no-fly zone, but the reality, and here I think Biden is doing the right thing, is if we get ourselves into a battle with a direct U.S. and NATO battle with Russia, and Putin his back is up against the wall, then I think we're going to see him using nuclear weapons, and there goes the planet. So I think we have to be thoughtful and careful about that. So I mean, I think one of the two other things to say. One is I think I think we've all been properly horrified by Putin's two nuclear threats, and these absolutely have to be condemned. And one upside of that is it's helping to focus people's attention again on the danger posed by nuclear weapons. What most Americans are unaware of, what most Americans are unaware of is the United States has done this at least 30 times.
Right.
During international crises and wars. So we should be using this as, if you will, as a learning and teaching experience. That this is a time when, especially as now Biden is moving toward finishing his nuclear posture review, it's time for us to adopt a no first strike doctrine. We don't want the Russians to do it. We shouldn't be doing it either.
Right.
So we need to, I think, to be thinking about that. The other piece,
it's an interesting concept, because mutually assured destruction, it may not be the way that things can work going forward.
Right.
On the issue of the plants, we're facing a real possibility of environmental damage, consequences to the population in the immediate vicinity if these plants are compromised, and they're deliberately being compromised. Now, luckily, in Chernobyl, apparently things are under control. In the Dnipro region, where the power plant was struck, but it was only an ancillary building. Now, I'm assuming that the targeting was smart enough to miss the core and hit on the outside, but I'm not so sure. It could have been just some luck. And in either case, you can't let the power go down, because you need local power to keep the place cool. These targets should not be used at all.
Right.
Whether it's for posturing or for real consequences. And then that said, the use of civilian infrastructure in general, the bombing of apartment buildings is absolutely it's a war of terror. It's not going after military assets or any assets for that matter, other than the attempt to terrorize the human population.
But one thing I did want to add, I think You know, first, I think being realistic is important, but yet standing up for what we need for survival on this planet is also important. So having international organizations that have the teeth, you know, that we recognize, and all of this is a long shot. It's not that I don't get how improbable it is, but yet for our very survival, if people can smarten up enough to realize that we need an international criminal court, we need strong international organizations, and nuclear weapons have already been deemed illegal through the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So as of over a year now, they're illegal on the planet. So chosen to ignore. We've chosen to ignore that. We've chosen to not ratify that. But yet there are people, and this is what I want to say, that people power. What Yogi Berra said, when you get to the fork in the road, take it, right? So I feel that we're at the fork in the road. So it's going to be violence or nonviolence. It's going to be climate catastrophe and nuclear bombs and everything else, or we're going to learn to cooperate and communicate and cooperate as we tell our children to. So that we need the negotiations, that we need to be talking and sitting at the table, offering things, finding a path forward. What can I say? We must, or we will not survive.
But yes, it's all true, and that means we need to find some ways to actually manifest that power, right? So one thing that we need to be doing right now, I think, is working a bit against the war fever here in the United States.
Yes, please.
And pressing on our members of Congress that to avoid, not to back the idea of the no-fly zone, which is basically suicidal.
Right.
To be demanding ceasefire, negotiation, and troops out. I mean, I think those are basic things, but not to be pouring fuel on the fire.
Right.
And I think we also need to be doing what we can. And look, the United States is compromised. It's so compromised. But you were talking about the International Criminal Court. I was stunned. The New York Times gave Madeleine Albright a half page on the op-ed page to rail against Putin. Okay, Putin needs to be railed against, but not Madeleine Albright. This is the woman who, during the sanctions against Iraq, was asked, "Is it worth it to have 500,000 children die of starvation because of sanctions?" And she said, "Yes, it's worth the price." So I think we need to have some humility here.
Yes.
And I think we need to be encouraging people in other nations to be doing a lot of the mobilization, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, China is in an interesting position. It could weigh in to help. Mm-hmm. And I think we ought to be doing everything we can to encourage that process. Sure. Mm-hmm. South Africa, India. I mean, they're all countries that have some leverage here, and we should be encouraging them to do that. We should be, I've been fortunate to be involved in webinars with people in a number of different countries who are pushing, and people are holding demonstrations against no-fly zones. People are protesting outside Russian embassies. These are all things that need to happen.
Mm-hmm. And supporting the people in Russia who are taking serious risks themselves, who've been arrested and everything else.
Well, yeah. Again, it's the people of Russia that need to decide the course that Russia will take.
Right.
And yes, as a result of the current situation, they're going to be suffering even more than they have suffered.
Right.
Now to begin with, this is already somewhat of a failed state because of the type of government that they're running.
Right.
The Kremlin is not benefiting, has not been benefiting the Russian people as much as it's been benefiting a particular cluster of kleptocrats around Moscow and maybe St. Petersburg as well. So, mega yachts aside, just going after those people unfortunately, is, and this is to your parallel regarding what Madeleine Albright said. Unfortunately, the Russian people will suffer again, even more than they've been suffering under their own regime, because they're living in poverty now, even before the war, and will continue to do so, and even worse. But until they themselves decide that this is not the way to go, things are not going to change in Moscow. And I applaud those that take the risk of 15 years in jail just to saying that there is a war. The 50 or so Russian cities and towns that in which there have been demonstrations.
Right.
Russian people don't want this. They don't want to go in this direction. And those that are speaking clearly are wanting a change. Unfortunately, the majority are silent. And this is where not silence on our part, but silence on their part is going to perpetuate the perceived power that the Kremlin has from its own people. Until they decide that they want something different, we're not going to see it. Whatever pressure, military is on the it's on the margin. Economically, we are applying significant pressure, and it's going to result in pain, and maybe that pain will result in change, and maybe not. I don't know.
Well, if we have that going on, if we start engaging in the conversations that need to be had, the negotiations that need to be done, so that there is an opportunity, so that we can, offer relief, so that we can stop the sanctions. That's the first thing. Maybe we say, with the ceasefire, we'll stop the sanctions, and that's our starting point.
I mean, Blinken, I think, today was asked about it, and the U.S. position on this is reasonable. Basically saying that the sanctions are not permanent, and depends on what Russia does when. So if Russia does move to a ceasefire, if it does commit to withdraw, then at least some of the sanctions the U.S. is saying will be lifted. So that's all good. And the other thing I think we need to think about here, I guess two things having to do with Russians. First of all, every time the United States gets into a war or into a confrontation, there's a stereotyping, a hatred that builds against those people, right? Within the United States and in the other countries. So you go back to World War I, World War II. Where it was against Germans, World War II against Japanese. We have terrible anti-Asian racism right now, going out of the tensions with China, and similar now in relationship to Russians. I think it's important where it's possible for us to be encouraging, on the one hand, reaching out to Russians among us who are not identifying with war, but also as we can to be encouraging dialogue with Russians who are in opposition, and even some who may be people who can influence the government. Difficult to do as Russia is shutting down all kinds of communications, but there are systems such as Signal and others where you can have encrypted communications, and there are relations, scientists and others who are continuing to find ways to talk. We're going to need to build these relations for the long term.
Absolutely. It's important to continue the communication. I'll give you one local example very quickly. We have a Buffalo sister city relationship with Tver, Russia. There's been a movement to cut off all relations with Russia, and including sister city relationships. I put it on the people of Tver and the Buffalo sister city relationship to make a decision. It involves in their court. Are you for the war and continue to support, or will you make a statement? If so, we don't need to shut this element down, these kinds of relationships. But there has to be some statement.
That is such a great idea, is to get people Get people working for peace. We the people who suffer from all these threats, we need to start speaking sense to the people and speaking with people. So even the people who aren't sensible, it's part of communication and cooperation. Let's start with the communication piece. And this is Talking Peace. We've got just a minute, and I mean less than a minute, for each of you because we're really out of time. But it's been such a great conversation. You know, maybe anything that you think people can do to help. So we just heard actually from you one thing. So both of you, just a final word.
Oppose the war fever, work for ceasefire, work for negotiations.
Yes.
Troops out.
Yeah, I agree
Yuri?
with all three, and pray. Whatever your faith
Yes.
is, and you know, there's a wide variety. Pray, because our intentional thought does make a difference.
Yes. Thank you both so very much. I cannot thank you both enough. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I'd like to put you two in charge, then we'd be all set. So all I know, this is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And good to meet you, Yuri. And may this turn out better than it looks to be.
Well, let's stay in touch. This is obviously not ending this week. We need to find those solutions.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. So, well, to be continued. We could do another show. We could have Jim join us, or maybe Deanna might even want to, or both of you.
She's much better looking on the live stream than I am. You know, the radio doesn't.
Well, I
show
do like
anything.
to have a woman. We were just all women talking about childcare right before. But anyway, thank you both so very much.
Take care. Good to meet you.
Really appreciate. Thanks a
this goes over well.
jillion. Yes, yes. Oh, it will. Thanks a jillion. Take care, Joseph. To be continued. And Yuri, thank you so much. That was excellent. That was just such a great show. Oh my God. Very, very good.